Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee for the hearing today. For the record, my name is Steve Halloran, Stevehallloran, and I represent the 33rd District. I'm here today to present my legislative resolution LR 14, which calls for the state of Nebraska to call for a limited Article 5 Convention of States, which would discuss and potentially propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution, and I emphasize the word propose. It takes 34 states with matching resolutions to call a convention. Currently, 15 states have passed resolutions that match the language in LR 14. In 2020, there were 23 states where there is either active Convention of States legislation or it has already passed in one chamber. Once that 34 state threshold is met and an Article 5 Convention of States is called, and through a convention process amendments are proposed, those proposed amendments would still have to be ratified by 38 states as laid out in Article 5 of the United States Constitution. All proposals have to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. LR 14 calls for a convention to propose amendments in the following areas. 1, impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. 2, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. And 3, limit the terms of office for its officials and for members of Congress. By requiring matching resolutions by 34 states, it naturally creates a structured framework for topics discussed during the convention. Let me repeat that. By requiring matching resolutions by 34 states, it naturally creates a structured framework for topics discussed during the convention. All 34 states will be disciplined from their own state legislatures to stick to limiting discussions to the 3 topics. One item submitted to the committee today is a report commissioned by the U.S. Department of Justice at the request of the Attorney General to study Article 5. That report concludes that Article 5 conventions are limited and the process, including ratification, is safe. I wanted to make sure everyone had a copy of this report. I would like to shift gears a bit and take a few minutes to refute some of the arguments from those who oppose an Article 5 Convention of States, which you will hear from later in the hearing. You will hear the terms, quote, runaway convention, end of quote, and, quote, con, end of quote. A con refers to a constitutional convention. Constitutional convention is convened to write a new government charter, as was done in 1787 to fix the failed Article of Confederation. Through that process, the Constitution was created. Note that it took 3 years for 13 states to ratify the newly created Constitution. Clearly, even that convention was not a runaway process. However, an Article 5 Convention of States operates within the U.S. Constitution as a method to propose amendments to the Constitution, not as an instrument to rewrite the Constitution. Article 5 explicitly states that a convention can only meet for the purpose of proposing amendments. The Founding Fathers wisely decided that there needs to be 2 ways in which amendments could be proposed. In case the federal government became too powerful. Article 5 provides equality between Congress and the states. Then there is the fear of a runaway convention. You'll hear that term frequently. They will tell you that we won't have control of the process. That once a convention of states convenes, the delegates from each state will become drunk with power and propose amendments outside the scope of which the convention was called. Remember, 34 individual states with matching resolutions call for an Article 5 Convention of States. Clearly, these states have a mutual understood purpose. I do have a bill, LB 195, Adopt the Faithful Delegate to Federal Article 5 Convention Act, that will ensure that Nebraska delegates to an Article 5 convention will be bound to the scope of the subject matter in the state's application to a convention of states. You will hear more about this bill very soon. Other states have adopted similar legislation that would put constraints on their delegates. Second, one could reasonably agree that delegates, commissioners, would conduct in a civil manner, much like other interstate compacts. But let's just say that for some unknown reason, delegates or commissioners of the states represented at the convention go off the rails and pass by a majority vote of its members proposed amendments to the United States Constitution that fall outside the scope of the called convention. Say, eliminate the Second Amendment or outlaw abortion. Those proposed amendments would still have to be sent to the states for ratification. Remember, it takes 3/4 of the states, 38 states, to ratify an amendment to the Constitution. This is the same high ratification benchmark required by Congress when Congress proposes amendments to the Constitution. So let us focus on how Nebraska would handle the ratification process of a proposed amendments to the federal Constitution, be they either proposed by Congress or by a convention of states. Article 4, Section 2 of the rules of the Nebraska Unicameral Legislature states, quote, when considered as a bill, resolutions which propose amendments to the state constitution, propose the ratification or rejection of amendments to the federal constitution, or memorialize the Congress with regard to amendments to the U.S. Constitution, shall be considered and adopted in the same manner as bills, end of quote. Given that a proposed amendment to the United States Constitution would be referenced to this committee, the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee, the same process of public notice, public testimony, and committee member questions would be engaged. Then the bill would have to go through the executive committee process of voting the bill out of committee. If passed out of committee, it would be on to the legislative floor for debate. If the bill is allowed to be fully debated and the bill is passed by the Nebraska legislature, it would have to be ratified by the state of Nebraska. A similar process would need to be conducted by the other 49 bicameral state legislatures. If and only if 38 of the 50 states ratify proposed amendments to the United States Constitution, does the amendment get added to the United States Constitution? That is an extremely high bar to achieve, as it should be. To date, 33 amendments to the United States Constitution have been proposed. 27 of these have been ratified by a requisite number of states. By my limited math skills, that leaves 6 proposed amendments that have yet to be ratified. So the fear of a runaway convention is absurd. There are a multitude of procedural layers and steps before any proposed amendment is added to the United States Constitution. With that, I thank you, Chairman Brewer and committee members, those of you still remaining, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you for that opening. I guess if it's all right, I'd like to start with some questions.
Certainly.
You identified 3 areas. First one was curtailing or limiting the fiscal piece.
Right.
Limiting power and terms. Those 3 are probably the biggest burning issue, I guess, for lack of a better term, that are currently out there. So of those 3, in your personal opinion, which one is the most critical for our country right now?
Well, that's you're asking me to be subjective about that, but I think term limits are kind of a root issue for how, or for what we've seen in regard to how Congress has become, in effect, I believe, a runaway Congress. And the reason I say I think term limits are important is because over time, once you're elected to Congress, whether it's the House of Representatives or the U.S. Senate, your concern gets less to be about what necessarily might want to be looking at in response to what's best for the states or the United States in general. But your primary concern gets to be, what do I need to do to get reelected? And then consequently, if that becomes your priority, then that's what your focus becomes. So you start voting on issues that might help you get reelected. And so we've racked up $28 trillion. I wish it was $28 million. $28 trillion in debt over time. Both parties have been responsible for that. But a lot of it, I think, is because we have career politicians and too few statesmen.
And back to your very first issue, the issue of our national debt or the spending of our federal government. And I looked real quick here because I didn't even know myself. In 2000, we were at about 5.6 trillion as far as our national debt. And with where we are right now, do you think there's a point that we can spend ourselves so far in the hole that it makes the country essentially insolvable, that we're not going to be able to ever recover from it?
Well, I certainly think that's a risk. I think a good measuring benchmark of a threshold, if you will, is when the national debt becomes larger than the gross domestic product. All right, gross domestic product is an indicator of is an indicator of what it says it is. It's an indicator of how much wealth we produce as a nation, and if our debt exceeds our ability to produce that wealth, it's pretty much a definition of insolvency. Fiscal restraint, I think the best means of fiscal restraint would be, and who knows what the ideas would be that would come at this convention, but an idea might be of putting some percentage of gross domestic product as a limit on how much national debt you could have. And then spending would have to be governed to not exceed that.
All right. I just out of curiosity, was we interested in your opinion on that.
Sure.
All right. Questions for Senator Halloran? Senator Lowe.
Thank you, Chairman Brewer, and good to have you back. And you too, Senator Halloran. I've probably been inundated with more emails on this than any other thing we've done this year. And I've started to file them away. My folder for this is full. The ones against it is barely thick. And some of them, the ones that don't agree with LR 14, they say it is scary, that we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't open this up. What do you say?
Well, there's nothing scary about acknowledging what's in our Constitution now, right? I appreciate the question, Senator Lowe, because I will hear people, and we will probably hear from well-intended people this afternoon later on who might be opposed, who will say, this threatens the Constitution. I don't know how you can have something that specifically and clearly is stated in the Constitution be used to destroy the Constitution. Doesn't make any sense on the surface. Unfortunately, I believe some people look at the Constitution and look at it as though it's a buffet, right? They will say, oh, I love the Constitution. I love the looks of that buffet of rights that it's protecting, and except for this little part right here. I don't like this little part right here. So it's great, but I don't like that. But it is part of the Constitution. Matter of fact, all of us here on this committee took an oath when we became senators. Senator/Colonel Brewer's taken this oath many times, being an officer. But just to remind everybody of that oath, it says, I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Nebraska, and will faithfully discharge the duties of state legislator. Now, we think we're word craftsmen here as senators. Words make a difference. The wrong word in the wrong place makes a difference, right? But nowhere in that oath do I see I will support the parts of the Constitution I like. Doesn't say that. It's not a buffet. You love it all, or you don't pay any attention to any of it. I love it. I swore the oath. It means a lot to me. And I know it means a lot to all of you. But it's not a smorgasbord. We can't choose what we like and discount what we may not like. Article 5 is part of the Constitution. And it was put in place to help balance out a federal government if it came to a point where it became overbearing. That's what it was. It gave states the right to do something about that.
The term professional politician has been used, and part of this LR is term limits, maybe, or to review them anyway.
Mhm.
What do you consider a professional politician?
Well, it might be an insult to y'all if I said none of you seem to be professional politicians. But the fact of the matter is, I don't consider any of you professional politicians. You're not career politicians. This isn't what you decided to do as a career. You did it as public service. The distinction gets to be, and there are some professional politicians, office holders, but the difference gets to be, I think, when you take that oath, what you take it for, what you intend it to mean, right? It's a public service, and we have far too many career politicians in Washington. 35, 40 years, I'm sorry, they become an institution of their own after a while, and that's just not right.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, additional questions? Just an FYI, I did look up the U.S. Gross domestic product. Right now, we're at 21.43 trillion. National debt, 27.75 trillion, just for the record. All right, if there's no other questions, I assume you'll stick around for closing?
Oh, yes,
It'd be a good idea. All right, so we are on a 3-minute time, and Dick Clark has a very reliable timer here that's going to go off. So if you hear that, you'll know that you're done. Now, if we need to ask you more questions on the line that you're on, we will. But in order to get through folks in an efficient way, we're just going to have to stick to that. We'll start with proponents. So at this time, our first proponent want to come up. We'll go ahead and get started. All right, paperwork in. Have a seat. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Hello, my name is Mike Dobish, Mikedobesh. I'm from Wood River, Nebraska. State Senators, thank you for allowing us to testify today on the behalf of the Convention of the States. Our government is a we the people. You folks are our representatives. You represent us, which means you work for us, and you run our fine state of Nebraska, and we entrust you with the powers and responsibilities to the best of your abilities as you can to adhere not only to fiscal government, not to spend more than you make, but adhering to the Constitution as well as the state constitution. We the people are guaranteed certain rights and privileges, like free speech, to own firearms, the right to assemble, freedom of worship, to be assumed innocent until proven guilty, and that without due cause, law enforcement cannot just show up and take your guns. Today's hearing is a fine example of a government that allows our voices to be heard. Thank you again. Some time back, I served on the Central Platte Natural Resource Board of Directors. At different time, I made calls to state senators who were not from my voting district to discuss their opinions about certain issues and my concerns. Even though they were not my state senator, how they vote most certainly affected those in my neck of the woods. I could not think of one single time that I was not thanked for my call and the insight to whatever water issue I called about. This is why our state is doing so much better than others, because you listen to us, we the people. Whether we can vote for you or not, you folks have an open mind and have not forgotten who voted you into the positions you hold. And again, thank you. And if I remember right, I may have called some of you, but it's been a few years back. Again, thank you. But our federal government has long forgotten and no longer adhere to these principles that you folks embrace. We have term limits here and badly need them in Washington. These elected positions were never intended to be a career. Nationally, our Constitution in the last few months has been ignored by those who conduct elections, the Supreme Court, and those who wish to impeach President Trump for a second time. If we start picking and choosing which laws we uphold, dictated by someone's popularity, we are finished as a nation. The ruling class will implode at will, whichever laws they choose, and forget that little piece of paper called the Constitution. We as a state have needed to join the Convention of the States for some time, but now with this fraudulent president in place, we need this more than ever. As we speak, there is legislation being drafted to require a federal permit to purchase ammunition, to purchase firearms, to tax and register higher capacity magazines, and to outright make them illegal. I have also heard that they want to include in the next China virus stimulus a provision that would allow law enforcement to come into your house without a warrant and to seize your guns. Contrary to what the mainstream media would have you to believe, the violence in Capitol Hill was instrumented not just by some, I'm done.
Well,
And
the good news is
I think
that
you get the idea.
You've given us your testimony here, so we have it to finish through. But thank you for your testimony. Let's go ahead and take a chance here and see if we got questions. Are there any questions? All right.
I'll do a
Again.
quick one.
Oh, yes, Senator Lowe.
Mike, thanks for coming out today, and
Yep.
thanks for being here and voicing your opinion. How important is this LR to you?
Very. Now granted, I think I spoke to some of the people here. Everybody's not happy. This isn't just me. This isn't like a talk in the coffee shop. It's everywhere. Because of what happened in the last election, and this isn't just about this, but this has brought it to the forefront. Nobody in Washington listens to us. You know, back when I was on the Central Plant NRD board, I got to have a pretty decent relationship with Deb Fisher. I cannot remember the last time she ever, I sent in my questionnaire, I called an office, and I got a real letter. I get these form letters that don't even hardly touch on what I needed. And I believe it was 2 election cycles ago, everybody in the Republican, contingency showed up at the Hastings Airport. Everybody was there except for, I believe, Bacon. Even our governor was there. There's a number of things, as you folks may well know. Agriculture is having a tough time, except for the last few months. We're finally starting to turn things around. I hand-delivered them about a 6-page letter and what I thought there's some things that could be done that wouldn't cost the taxpayers a dime. I got not one response back, not one. Now, I understand when you're a U.S. senator, a U.S. congressman, you don't have the time to necessarily address every person individually. But come on, you folks do such a wonderful job. It's like I said before, and I'm not just saying this to kiss your behind. I'm just saying we as Nebraska, we have values. We do things right. We adhere to the Constitution. You listen to us. You probably are not from very far from me because Shelton is one of your areas. So, I mean, we're all local. And like I said before, I can't remember any time. And usually my issue had to do with the Platte River Cooperation Agreement. Everybody was willing to listen. Washington doesn't care anymore. Just think about the executive orders right now that have been signed. We cannot spend more than we bring in. If you forgive everybody's college tuition, well, why stop there? You know what? I farm. I guarantee I could spend more I could buy more stuff and help the economy if I didn't owe it. But if we take away personal responsibility, where are we? We're nothing but, a bunch of people that the government is dictating to. And that's not what our founders envisioned for us. And I thank you for your question.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
That's it.
Thank you.
Before you go, just so you understand that I have an occasion to try and contact the federal representatives also. And if, as the chair of the government committee, I can send a letter and get no response, it may give you some idea of how difficult it is to actually get a response. Now, I will give credit to Adrian Smith. He has been very good about responding. But unfortunately, the big government machine does kind of swallow up your ability to communicate and let them know what the problem on the ground here is. So I agree with you, but it's not just the average Joe that struggles. I mean, the system really needs to figure out how to get in
Right.
touch with the people where
I
they
agree
came
with
from.
you. On my trip here from Wood River, I tried calling the state Republican Party. Good luck with that. They're not answering their phone. It went to a cell phone and it said the voicemail was full. So what do you do?
Well,
That's when.
I'm not gonna comment on that
No,
one. I'm
no,
just
no, I
focused
understand.
on
This
DC
isn't
here.
partisan. I'm just saying that's one example.
All right, well, thank you for your testimony.
No, thank you, folks.
All right, our next proponent, come on up. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you for having me. My name is Dean Kleinschmidt, and it's spelled DeanKleinschmidt. And I'm from Crofton, Nebraska. I'm a small businessman. I farm and I do ag diesel repair. And our family operates the business, my wife and our 5 kids. I like the previous man before. I've been always very proud of how our state has operated and come up with, a lot of people have been talking about term limits in this country for the last 30 years. And our state, I'm very proud, has been able to implement this and make it work. That is one, because I have heard of a lot of states that have had Supreme Court rulings and they have thrown that stuff out, but we've made it work. And I'm glad that we have to show the country as a good example. I also, as a businessman also, I have to do fiscal responsibility, or my balance sheet has to work, or every year I won't get my operating loan. And our country needs to be based off of capitalism as well as good governance. And paying your bills is number one thing on both. What I've seen in the last year with the Constitution and how it seems the federal government has kind of done a lot of things that were not very right with our Constitution. And I feel that these specific measures in the long run would help direct us back on the right path. I know we can get into all the infringements that they have done wrong and what they would like to do to us. But if we simply would just get rid of career politicians and get this thing on track with our fiscal responsibility, a lot of the problems that are dogging our economy, like healthcare, which is what has been, before Obamacare, I was very successful as an independent single entrepreneur. It has caused most people to either get 5 more employees or go to a larger, and it's taken away mom and pop businesses. You drive around lots of rural areas and there are a lot of shops that are closed because their cash flow does not fit the tax brackets. I don't know. I can go into some of the things in the last year that I've noticed that I felt with our government. And I know this has nothing to do with what's being proposed here, but the fact that 2 states we have certain laws governing our election. And I know there's 7 states that voted after the day, which was to me absurd. But there were 2 states that their state legislatures said what they wanted done, and their attorney generals of their states didn't do it. And that was left to go. We need to do this in order to rein in politicians as a whole across the United States to realize they need to be responsible for what they're doing.
Okay, thank you for your testimony and your perfect timing. All right, questions? Senator Lowe.
Thank you, Chairman Brewer, and thank you for coming today, Dean. You had a list on that notepad I saw. Would you like to quickly read off all the things that concern you on that list? It doesn't have to be quickly, but
Right. And, you know, I wrote these down because this is what has inspired me to come here. And I know it does not relate to this, but I do feel that the first one that I noticed was, like I said, I brought up one of them to you about how our election was conducted. And things like that shake our faith. And we as a people have to keep our faith in our Constitution, our God, our country, our families. We need to keep that faith. And when there's an obvious mistrust like that, it causes our faith to be shaken. The second thing that I was very unhappy about how things were conducted was the impeachment of our president. He's a private citizen now. This is a pointless thing. It's not even constitutional. They're wasting our tax dollars. It's an abuse of power by Congress. And, you know, the first one I would call an abuse of power by states. Those states should have been not allowed to participate in the electorate if they broke our Constitution. Those two states. I'm saying the other ones maybe didn't, but the two of them should not have been allowed to be counted. And then the third thing is our president proposing that the District of Columbia is allowed senators to represent. That's an abuse of power by our president. I mean, I know maybe that, I don't know when that's going to come into fruition or if it will. It's just an executive order. But there's three different levels of different branches of government: state government, the Congress, and the presidency, that are, you know, proposing things that they're not even going by the right way around, like we are proposing today. It's the right way around. We're just having limited, you know, I feel very safe with what we're doing, and we need to just proceed with a safe plan. This over the last 40 years is proven something that we've all talked about, and we just can't seem to get it done on account of career politicians.
thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Additional questions? Thank you, sir, for your testimony.
Thank you. I was very nervous.
You did great.
We are no different than anybody else here. So
I appreciate what you do.
Okay, next proponent, come on up. That is a good looking hat you got there.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Welcome to the Government Committee.
My name is Nick Falkers, Nickfolkers. I'm from Hardington, Nebraska, northeast corner of the state. I am a part owner of a 14-man independent diesel truck repair shop. I am going to read this. I'm not an eloquent speaker. I am of the opinion that our founding fathers' vision of self-governance is under attack, that Washington, D.C.'s career politicians are purposefully and systematically working towards the end of such self-governance. I support the Convention of States initiative. I support the idea of an elected official serving their country for a limited term and returning home to the workforce. Convention of States will be necessary to make term limits a reality.
All right, well, thank you. That was direct and to the point. That's appreciated. Questions? All right, well, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you for your time.
You bet. All right, we'll get the cleanup done here. We will rotate up. The next proponent. Sir, welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is David Schneider. That's DAVID, I'm the Regional Director for Convention of States Project. I'm here in support of LR 14 and for Nebraska to exercise its right to call an Article 5 Convention of States to propose reforms which limit the federal government's money, power, and time in federal office. Nebraska has a long history of leading on these reform efforts. I think Nebraska should once again lead in this effort. Nebraska has made many applications for a convention of states in its history. Such applications led to Congress taking note and proposing amendments such as women's suffrage, the direct election of U.S. senators, and term limits on the president. These all started with applications for conventions, and all were adopted right here in Lincoln. To look at this application for a convention of states, you need to consider additional history. 49 states have made applications for convention at one point or another. In all, over 400 such applications have been made. Yet we have never held a convention under Article 5. Despite all these attempts, never have the states met the 2/3 requirement on any subject to make the call for a convention possible. Congress always moved to act prior to the magic 2/3 threshold being met. That was the story from the very beginning of our republic. Virginia made the very first application for a convention of states under Article 5 in late of 1787. The Constitution was newly ratified and the first Congress was about to get underway. The Anti-Federalists were promised protection of their natural rights in the ratification process. Virginia was particularly insistent on the need for amendments to be made immediately. They were not going to wait on Congress. They quickly made application, and I'll quote from that actual text. The cause for amendments we consider a common cause, and since concessions have been made for political motives, which we conceive may endanger the Republic, we entrust the considerable zeal with shown for objecting those provisions, which experience has taught us are necessary to secure from danger the inalienable rights of human nature. The slow forms of congressional discussions and recommendations, if necessary, they should ever agree to any change, would we fear be less certain of success. Happily for their wishes, the Constitution hath presented an alternative by administering to a convention of the states. Today, that's what we're here to ask this body to adopt is LR 14 and to push the movement forward for reforming Washington, D.C. We all know it's woefully broken. You guys have the actual power to fix it. And that's why we're here to help push this initiative and ask you to push this to the floor for consideration by the full body. Thank you, and I stand ready for questions.
All right. Thank you for your timely testimony. Let me hit you with a question first. Right now, how many other states are kind of in the window we're in where we're looking at the possibility of doing this?
There's quite a few. Actually, I work in six states myself. I just came from Pierre. They're actively considering their legislation. As we speak, Montana Senate probably is taking a vote on this measure. I'm hoping that we get a positive outcome there today. There's several other in the hopper, but I would say right now with active legislation, we're probably around 5, 6 with many more ready to file this year. We could have legislation rolling in 20 additional states this year.
Yeah, sometimes we forget that.
And to further that point, we're active in all 50 states of the union. So we actually have a grassroots network in all 50 states.
Well, sometimes we forget that other places have to get through 2 houses. We
Correct.
have that uniqueness here. All right, questions for David? Senator Lowe.
Thank you for being here. Which 6 states do you represent?
I live in the state of Kansas, 2 hours south of here in Manhattan. But I have Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota. I have Wyoming, Montana, and the great state of Michigan.
Okay. Why is Michigan a great state?
Just because I spend so much time there. They're a year-round legislature, so
Okay.
it's fun to work in.
All right. And all of the, in all 6 states, this constitutional amendment is identical?
In all 15 states that have passed it thus far, it's been identical, and we that's by design. We don't want any kind of legal challenges or anything to the call for the convention, and they're all identical. The ones that we're proposing currently are all identical as well.
So for the people that say this is going to be a wild convention if it ever happens, what do you say to that?
I say that 34 states have already agreed why they're going to meet. They are, and that's a super majority. They're going to keep it to that subject matter. They are agreeing to place further limits on the size, scope, jurisdiction of the federal government, term limits on federal officials, and fiscal restraints. So inside of that, would be the germaneness of the topic, subject matter of the convention, the meeting, essentially, the board of directors meeting for the states to have over their creation, which is the federal government.
Thank you very much.
Additional questions? One more for you here. Now, Nebraska has a term limit, or term limits, 2 terms, and they also have a mandatory balanced budget. How many other states that you know of are in that position to have both those requirements?
Both of those requirements, I'm not 100% sure. As far as the balanced budget requirement, every state in the union actually has a balanced budget requirement. Of course, the federal government does not. Term limits, it's about half the states at this point. About half the states I've worked in. I've worked also in the states of Oklahoma, Texas, Missouri. Some of those states have it as well. North Dakota certainly does as well. South Dakota does.
And their term limits, are they similar to ours, with just 2 terms, or does it vary?
They do vary somewhat, but it's similar, 2, 3 terms, something like that. Some are just time in office total, either in the House or Senate as a combination.
Oh, okay. See.
So there's various different ideas that are out there. And that's the beauty of holding this meeting, this convention, is really to bring all those ideas into that meeting. And the best experiences will make it out of that type of setting. So that's why we don't advocate for any particular, time in office or anything. I think you guys or representatives from other states are going to have the best experience with term limits and be able to make the best recommendations at that meeting.
All right. No other questions. Thank you, sir, for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right. We are ready for our next proponent. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you. My name is Ernie Sears, E-R-N-I-E, Sears, S-E-A-R-S. I live in Omaha in District 9, and I'm here to testify in favor of Resolution 14. And I just wanted to let you know that there's a lot of activity in our project, Convention of States. And the Convention of States project was started in August of 2013. I joined the group as a volunteer in 2014. And since the beginning of this project, Nebraska has generated 14,900 or more petition signers for this effort. And so we're growing every year, every day. And the increase in activity recently is really quite overwhelming. We can't handle the influx, but we're growing greatly. I can say all this because I volunteered to be the state director, so I have information that others apparently aren't interested in or don't care about. So that's why I give you those statistics. Anyway, the point is we're really growing. So I want to ask the senators, how many times have you heard this phrase? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creators with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay? Well, I'm here to tell you there's more. I just listed 3 self-evident truths that Jefferson put in the Declaration. That all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, that's 3. There's 2 more. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government. Well, I just want you to know that I do not consent of what the government is doing now. And number 5, that whenever the form of government becomes destructive of these ends. It is the right of the people to alter it, abolish it, and institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and powers as form shall to their idea be safe and happiness. Okay, the point here is we have the right to alter or abolish the government because it's tyranny. It is destructive of our rights. Well, we're not going to abolish it, not without a lot of blood. So how are we going to alter it? We're going to alter it with Article 5 Convention. That's why we're here, to talk about what can be done peacefully and legally and safely. So that's why I'm here. And I just want to say that I think that I love Nebraska. I love the United States. And those two entities need a lot of love.
Well, they can argue with them. All right, questions? I would tell you that I have been through this rodeo a few times, and this year, the number of text messages, emails, and letters reference the Convention of States has exceeded probably not only previous years, but maybe as much as all the previous ones combined. So there is a much stronger push from folks that see a concern. So what you're saying isn't a one out. That we spent a lot of time trying to consolidate the messages. And just so everyone hears this, when you send a message in, if you send your name and your address or enough information to where we have more to work with, then it's a lot more valuable to us in being able to use that message. So, to a lot of folks that sent in, hey, this is a great idea, I fully support it, and then never put your name with it, it somehow loses its meaning, and it doesn't make us to where we can utilize that in our accounting of those that are in support or in opposition. So just as a kind of an FYI that to be effective, you really need to be willing to share your information. So for one, it's critical that we understand where these messages are coming from to make sure they're Nebraskans who truly have it in their heart to see things changed or not changed, depending on your opinion, and not just blasts of messages to try and affect things one way or the other. But we have seen a groundswell of messages on this LR14 like no other bill that we dealt with. So just to share with you that.
Thank you, Senator.
Anyway, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, put our crew up.
This is one of the most politest group I've ever seen. They keep on pointing at each other. You go first. You go first.
Yeah. I was glad that Tony Baker didn't try and get to the front of the line here. He was a gentleman and allowed you to go up, so I appreciate that, Tony.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Thank you, and welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you. My name is Barbara K. Disher. It's B-A-R-B-A-R-A. Disher, D as in David, I-S-H-E-R. I'm from West Point, born and raised here. Anyway, thank you for allowing me to testify before you today in support of Nebraska's critical role in calling for a convention of states. As I said, I'm a third-generation Nebraskan. I am an attorney, and I operated a small business for over 30 years. My role today is to speak to you in support of the convention from the perspective of a small business owner, although you've had a couple of people speak here much better than I will be able to, but not as an economist or as a statistician or a researcher. So don't ask me for numbers. As I've seen, the root cause of the threat to Nebraska's small business and to our very way of life is the political movement that stands for and is implementing an autocratic federal government with severe economic and social regimentation. This expanding federal government has openly put in motion threats to the stability and viability of small business in Nebraska. There's lots of examples, but I have three. Dysfunctional industries such as those in energy, food, and transportation are being intentionally destroyed. Many of our small communities actually generate their energy by disfavored energy sources. So will we see rolling blackouts when coal or natural gas becomes scarce? Secondly, one-size-fits-all laws are being implemented without regard to the cost of living or the cost of doing business here in Nebraska. Many times rules without laws are designed and implemented by Congress without opportunity for reasonable legislative debate and decision-making. It's impossible for small businesses to comment when actions are taken through emergency funding and executive order. And finally, there appears to be no practical experience by or impact on those creating the rules in Washington and those that have to live with them here in Nebraska. For example, I have friends, flower shops, gyms, hair salons that had to close here didn't have to close if they were serving Congress over the past year. So I am supporting the Convention of States because of it avoiding the historical pitfalls that many powerful countries have also experienced when government is far removed from the people. It can bring back home to Nebraska the ability to enable and define laws that fit Nebraska's needs and lifestyle. And it brings back common sense, you guys, to design and implement rules and timeframes that fit our resources and needs. So I'd like to conclude by quoting Martin Luther King. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. We are unfortunately within a time of challenge and controversy, and we need you, our leaders, to stand up and help us. We ask you to not give up Nebraska's constitutional rights and power, to keep Nebraska strong, and vote to move LR 14 out of committee. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Quick follow-up question. Your hometown is where again?
West Point, Cumming County.
We have a very strong representation from Northeast Nebraska. We got West Point, we got Hardington, we got Crossley, and then we got that lone Wood River guy. So you guys came a lot of miles, and that's the idea of these hearings, so that you are able to come and voice your concerns about issues. So thank you for that. Let's see if we have any questions. Questions. All right. Again,
Well, you guys
thank
were
you for
easy.
your testimony. You did great.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to the Government Committee.
Good morning, Chairman Brewer and members of the Government Committee. I'm Tony Baker. For the record, that's spelled Tonybaker. I'm from Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm here to testify in support of LR 14. I'd like to note that I am Senator Brewer's legislative aide. He was gracious enough to give me like 0.1 hours of work off today to come here and do this. And so I'm presently on leave from my job in the legislature. This is the third time in 5 years I've testified for this legislation. Today, I want to touch on two commonly heard arguments against the Convention of States. The first is the Convention of States has never been used before, so we should be afraid of this method. And the second is if it ever is used, it will quickly go out of control and rewrite the Constitution. Both of these arguments, which you'll hear various renditions of, are demonstrably false. Opposing the Convention of States because it's never been used before begs a question. How was the 21st Amendment to the U.S. Constitution ratified? Congress chose the convention method of ratifying that amendment. That's the first and only time that method of ratification has ever been used by Congress. It was brand new, it had never been used before. So either Congress was reckless to use this never been used before method of ratification, or maybe Congress set an example for the states to follow. There's nothing wrong with using a part of the Constitution, as Senator Halloran pointed out, that's never been used before. That's not a really good reason not to do something. Regardless of how the amendment is proposed, as you've heard and will continue to hear, it still requires 3/4 of the states. 38 states have to ratify the amendment. 33 amendments have been proposed in our history, 27 of them have been ratified. And so clearly the Article 5 process and the checks and balances in that process work. In Madison's notes from the very first convention of states, which is also known as a constitutional convention, because every one of those delegates was there with a commission from their state, it's clear that both methods in the Constitution were intended to be equal. And I quote, "which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution," is what Article 5 says. So both methods, for all intents and purposes, were the same. Arguing that the Convention of States could somehow run away and rewrite the Constitution is a false premise factually. It shows little regard for the law, logic, political reality, history, legal precedent, and the plain language in the Constitution. In closing, I'd like to say I strongly support LR 14, urge members to vote this bill out to general file. And incidentally, the 21st Amendment was the amendment that ended prohibition. And along with 7 other states, Nebraska did not ratify that amendment to the Constitution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. I would have bet money that the alarm would have went off before you finished, so that's refreshing. Now, for the sake of everyone here, did I ask you to do a presentation?
No,
Okay. And we will not pay you, so you know.
no, yeah,
Okay.
you're not, you don't pay me much now.
I know, it's true. I even pay you less now. All right, questions? All right, seeing none, thank you for your testimony. All right. Next proponent.
Hi, my name is John Crossley, John-Crossley. I'm here to talk about money. Money is the one thing that can control us all, move mountains, build rivers, buildings, the whole 9 yards, but it can also destroy a country in the blink of an eye. The Congress, the House, the Senate, the executive branch, they're spending like drunken sailors, except when drunken sailors are run out of money, they don't get to spend anymore. Unfortunately, our government continues to print it. And there's this little thing called hyperinflation rearing its ugly head. And I'm terrified that it's going to come. That's all I have to say.
Okay.
Short, sweet, and to the point.
Short, sweet, and to the point. So when I mentioned earlier that our gross domestic product is 21.43 trillion, international debt's 27.75, that must have got your attention, right?
Unfortunately, not only that, but with the unfunded liabilities we have hiding in the background, we're due for a comeuppance.
Well, I can't say as I mean, there's a point where simple math makes one concerned that the future of our country probably is at some point. I mean, you cannot continue to have that disparity and not at some point. I mean, the rest of the world will look at it and simply say, that's not realistic, that you can be a viable country if your debt is so deep and so, impossible to ever repay that you're doing that simply to, meet whatever needs you want without any regard to the cost to the people of the country.
Robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak.
Something like, all right, questions? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next proponent. Yes. Yeah. My legal counsel just made the comment that he must have got that haircut just to impress me, but. All right, welcome to the Government Committee.
Thank you, Senator Brewer and members of this council for hearing my words today. My name is William Ernst, W-I-L-L-I-A-M-E-R-N-S-T. I too am from the northeastern part of the state. I represent Oberton, Nebraska. I've heard a lot of testimony about the facts that surround what's going on in this country. And I have found that it's been hard to be very poignant, accurate, and respectful at the same time, so I think I'll just stick to feelings. You're looking at a man who's broken spiritually, who's broken not understanding what direction our country's going in. I was born in 1966 in Fremont, Nebraska. I was born to two exceptional parents that taught me the value of hard work, honesty, integrity. Those were those markings of you that made you the man that you were. Your word was your bond. You respected this country. You respected its founding principles. You followed its laws. You contributed to society. And your hard work and your perseverance was going to put you to an elevation of that pursuit of happiness that we all wanted to achieve. No, it doesn't say that we'll find it, but we have the right to pursue it. It's unfortunate that I see our country taking a complete right turn that's just so unexplainable, where criminal behavior seems to be appreciated and understood and rewarded, and those that follow the laws of this country are persecuted, put into compartmental positions, and afraid of their lives in some cases. What the hell's going on here? What do you do as an individual when you don't have the avenues for your voice to be heard? If I can't come before a council like this and express my grievances, and I can't expect it, or I can't demand that it gets to the next level, I implore you to take it to the next level. You have the power to do that, and please wield that sword, because I feel like we're a critical mass. We're in a bad place. We're so divided, so distrusting, so angry with each other. And I don't believe it's over color skin, and I certainly don't believe it's over a lack of a creed or a belief that we all have. We're not being represented. Our voice isn't heard. Our concerns aren't addressed. We feel left out. I personally feel left out. I don't feel like I have a voice anymore. And that puts you in a very dark and sometimes dangerous position where you feel like everything you were taught to believe and understand is wrong, that it's been misconstrued as a patriot or a person who's insurgent or at least at the worst racist for believing in integrity and honesty being what makes you the man that you're going to be. I implore you to take this to the next level and save this country from what I feel to be sure destruction. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? All right, well, you didn't look at a single note. You went from the heart, and thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you again.
All right, we'll do a quick cleanup, and then we'll have our next proponent up. Be careful, that chair can be a little tricky. And then when you get sit down in it, you realize how low you are.
What?
You realize how low the chair is and how tall the table is.
Yeah.
Welcome to the government committee.
Nice to meet you. My name is Judy, Judy, Hickey, Hickey. I'm here on behalf of my great-grandchildren. I have two 11-year-olds and one 6-year-old. And I am really becoming concerned about what kind of a country they're going to be living in. I see a really big problem with federal overreach extending into education. I continually tell my adult granddaughters to be engaged and to know what the schools are teaching their children and my great-grandchildren. The federal mandates for even the youngest grades are appalling. I have friends who are retired educators, and they're very glad that they aren't teaching anymore due to federal programs, and that's their words, not mine. The Midwest is not immune to the current directives, such as the critical race theory. Our children are not taught about America as a land of opportunity, freedom, or futures we all have access to. Schools are run by local school districts and supported by states provide a much better environment and outcome for the students. The education results at present are not great and are getting worse. Why is this happening? It's not money. The United States spends more per student than any other nation in the world, and yet our scores and standing are dropping. Our teachers have to spend their own money to equip classrooms to take care of kids' basic education needs. And again, it's not money. The problem is massive federal bureaucracy that consumes money and makes demands on states and local school districts. The problem is real. The problem is enormous. And we really have to do something about it before it's too late. The federal government has usurped education from the state's government, from the states. And in my opinion, government works better closer to home. So I'm here today to ask you to take action on LR 14, which also addresses term limits. You have term limits, the president has term limits, however, the federal House and Senate do not. I often hear that we don't need term limits because we have elections, but considering we currently have the House and Senate, people who have been there for 40 years or more, and it clearly points out that elections don't work. We are at a time that is clearly visible for all to see that we sincerely need term limits. And I ask you to accept the responsibility to vote this bill out of committee and bring it to the floor.
All right, thank you, Judy. Okay, questions? Senator Lowe.
Actually, I don't have a question. I just have a comment that the reason why I ran for this position was not for myself, but was for my sons and my future grandchildren, because I saw the way that our country was going.
I appreciate it.
And so I appreciate your testimony coming up here, speaking for your great grandchildren. And I just went back and checked. Senator Halloran's been sending us updates on the national debt. And the first one we got was in 2018. And he had said something like, since the last 525 days that we have met and discussed this, our national debt has gone up $1.6 trillion. And the following week, he said it's gone up another 13 billion. It seems to be going up a lot faster now than it ever has before. So thank you for coming and testifying.
You're welcome.
All right, any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, come on up. Welcome to the Government Committee.
Good afternoon, Chairman Brewer and committee members. My name is Brianna Valdino, spelled BriannaBowdino, and I'm from Ashland. And I'm here for my two kids and their future. I brought them with me here today, but they weren't able to come in. So they're sitting in the senator's office right now, I believe, hanging out. I am part of the Nebraska voters who support the Convention of States, which would use Article 5 of the United States Constitution to propose amendments to limit federal spending, limit federal power, and set term limits on federal officials. I urge you to decide today to move LR 14 to the floor for consideration in the unicameral. I believe this would be a move towards real unity. A convention of states bids all states to come together and is a strong show of unity across all party lines, something our nation desperately needs this very moment. This is not just a move for red or blue states, but for all the states to speak up for themselves and their values. This would also be a move to empower citizens and promote self-governance. Self-governance is understanding that we are intelligent and informed citizens who are capable of making good choices and accepting the consequences of them. Self-governance is the pinnacle of personal responsibility, which is sorely lacking across our nation. A convention of states doesn't just empower citizens, it also empowers our state legislature. Our runaway federal government has long been distant and disconnected from Americans in flyover states like Nebraska. The unique constituency of each state demands a robust and engaged state legislature that is brave to stand up against an overreaching federal government that's not familiar with our values. A convention of states seeks to limit an overreaching federal government. You know your government is too big when Americans believe that one election will change the course of their lives. The elitist culture of the laws for thee but not for me in our Congress needs to stop. Congress must be stopped from exempting themselves from the laws they passed. Also, our federal government seems limitless in the amount of tax dollars they spend and borrow, and the Convention of States seeks to set tax limits, spending, and borrowing limits. The Convention of States is a bold move provided to us in our Constitution for a time such as this. The 38 of the 50 states need to vote in favor of any amendments being ratified ensures little risk to our republic. So I ask you to move LR 14 forward in the name of unity for all states and the empowerment for Nebraskans. Thank you.
Hear that? And the red light would have just came on.
We have breaking news that the Montana Senate is actually going to be voting on our resolution momentarily. So we're going to cut from this hearing. We're not expecting to vote in Nebraska today. We are expecting to vote on the floor of the Montana Senate momentarily. We're going to switch to that stream in just a few seconds. Bear with us as we expect a vote in the Montana Senate here momentarily.
Resolution is simply a resolution that applies to Congress for a convention of states. The resolution, I'll just read it real briefly, is the guts of it are right on lines 24 through 27. The legislature of the state of Montana hereby applies to Congress under the provisions of Article 5 of the United States Constitution for calling a convention of states, limited to proposing amendments to the Constitution that imposes fiscal restraints on the federal government, limits the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and imposes term limits on officials and members of Congress. So this obviously reflects Article 5 of the United States Constitution, where there are two processes to amend the United States Constitution. The first one is whenever 2/3 of both houses deem it necessary, they can propose amendments, or on the application of 2/3 of the several states, call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case, when ratified by 3/4 of the states, can be a valid part of the Constitution. So members there, I just want to point out here that what we're talking about, we are talking about a convention for proposing amendments. This is not a constitutional convention. And any suggestion to the contrary is misleading and certainly not consistent with the language of the United States Constitution. So I'd ask you to disregard anybody that starts talking about a constitutional convention because they're talking about something that I'm not talking about. This, even in Article 5, you're limited to what you could propose because it says, you know, it puts off limits, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4, and Clause 1. Couldn't mess with slavery before 1808 or the direct tax before 1808, and you can't touch the sovereignty of the United States Senate. So the founders, just a little history here, the founders, toward the end of the 1787 Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, were talking about amendments to the Constitution. And Colonel Mason, George Mason, a delegate from Virginia, suggested that we have something lacking here, that there could, up until that point, the only amendment process was for the federal government, for Congress to propose amendments. Colonel Mason said that's not a good idea. There could be a time when Congress would be off the rails. He didn't use those words, but I'm just paraphrasing. And we would need the states to step in and control the power and the overreach of the federal government. So therefore, they used Article 5, the convention process for states to propose amendments as a balanced and paired power to the power that Congress had to propose amendments. And as you know, as I articulated yesterday, there's these three reasons that I want to share briefly. Number one, the federal government has close to 30 trillion in debt. They're getting deeper in debt every day. We cannot do that forever without dire consequences. We clearly know in the state of Montana, the federal government has gone way beyond their power. They're involved in our wildlife, our air, our water, just recently, the president shut down the Keystone Pipeline, which is definitely a takings. How can you invest billions of dollars in something and then just have it taken out of your hands like that? And finally, there's a time when congressmen should be elected, and there's a time when they should quit, and oftentimes they don't know when to quit. So this resolution also calls for proposing amendments around term limits. That, Mr. Chairman, I'll sit down, answer any questions, and close.
Are there amendments?
None, Mr. Chairman.
Is there discussion? Senator Manzella.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Senate. I want to take a moment and thank the Democrats. I thank you for your clarity of thought and your common sense and your integrity to not tinker with the supreme law of the land. And I believe it was divinely inspired and ordained, and you have gained my respect and my appreciation. To members on my side of the aisle, sadly, I have to share with you that I have never felt more disrespected as a committee member and as a human being than I have felt in association with this bill.
Senator Mazzella, please stay on the bill, okay?
This is a bill that is being promoted by the Convention of State Supporters, and I have been targeted by them, Mr. Chair, and they have cherry-picked my quotes. They have taken them out of context.
Okay, I understand that, but just
and
stay on the bill.
Compared me to Hillary Clinton and George Soros. I spent a lot of last night writing my resignation letter for this body because of the harassment that I have taken from the Convention of States supporters. And I think you need to know that. Now, had you been in the committee, you would have heard a story of a homeschool high school mother who took her 3 children to Chile for a project in capitalism with a very limited amount of money. They started a business. Everything was going well until a revolution started because of a constitutional convention. You would have heard JBS Western Regional Director testify that the Washington application is financially supported by the Wolf Pack, which is financed by George Soros. You would have heard a Montana grocer testify that there is no solid proof that each state will have 1 vote each. There is a lot of evidence that Congress will run a convention with an electoral college model, meaning Montana will have 3 votes and California will have however many, 44 or 45. You would have heard from former senator from Thompson Falls. He would have testified that if you want to push back on the federal government, we need to quit taking the money. 43 cents at least of every dollar comes from the federal government in Montana. And he asked us, how many of us sent our stimulus checks back? And if you studied this issue, you would know that there's a whole lot more opponents to this than Mr. Meckler would like you to believe. Reasonable people, equally informed, seldom disagree. And there's 3 issues that I want to touch on very quickly. Was the original 1797 condition that gave us our Constitution a runaway? There are those that think it was. You have a handout on your desk that is labeled as such. If you haven't spent the time reviewing that handout, you probably shouldn't be voting for this bill, because I guarantee you this handout has a lot more detail to offer than anything the Convention of States has put out. It's all footnoted, and if you can prove any of it wrong, there'll be a prize in it for you. Who controls, so was it a runaway? That's the first question. Who controls the Convention of States? And then I want to share a little bit about my experience at the mock Convention of States that I attended in 2016. So Meckler says it wasn't a runaway. I quote, "The founders told us back in 1787 that if we got to the point that we felt like the federal government was doing too much, too involved, too tyrannical, that we should call an Article 5 convention and take our powers back." He went on to say, "The idea of a runaway convention is a fallacy created in the 70s by the radical left to stop conservatives." Now that's kind of funny. I have never heard the John Birch Society referred to as the radical left. But I do know that they've been fighting for the Constitution and against communism since the 60s. So, was it a runaway? James Madison in Federalist 49, James Madison shows the convention is neither proper nor effective to restrain government when it encroaches. Justice Arthur Goldberg said in his 1986 editorial in the Miami Herald that it cannot be denied that the Philadelphia Convention of 1787 broke every restraint intended to limit its power and agenda, and any attempt at limiting the agenda an Article 5 convention would almost certainly be unenforceable. If you have not heard the arguments of the John Birch Society, of the Guarding the Constitution, of Publius Hilda, of Reclaiming the Republic, of Phyllis Schlafly Eagle Forum, of Campaign for Liberty, of Freedom First Society, of Gun Owners for America, of National Association of Gun Rights, and Oath Keepers, who all oppose this, you should probably not be voting to support this bill. Number 2, show me where it says that the states will control a convention. Show me. Show me where it says in Article 5. Because what it says is the Congress shall propose amendments, and the Congress shall call a convention for proposing amendments. There's another handout on your desk representing both sides of the issue as to who will control the Convention of States. And as you can see on the first page, Congress has not, in general, embraced the theory that its role is purely ministerial or clerical, and that its work is done once a convention has been called. On the contrary, it has traditionally asserted broad and substantive authority over the full range of the Article 5 convention's procedural and institutional aspects from start to finish. And there's 2 more quotes there taken from the Congressional Research Service report. Did you know that Congress has worked on passing rules for a Convention of States 41 times? On the second page, you'll see quotes from Rob Natelson. Rob Natelson says, if the convention wishes to alter one state, one vote rule, it may do so. A convention is free to change the rule of suffrage. And then later, in 2013, he amends his comments and states that each state has one vote. So he is conflicted in the information that he's put out. And they're making the rules up as they go, quite frankly, Mr. Chair. Now, I want to read you a quote from Washington's farewell address. If, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates. But let there be no change by usurpation, for through this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good. It is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. So is the Constitution wrong? If it's wrong, then exactly where is it wrong? The Convention of States people think that we're not adhering to the Constitution, so the idea is to amendment and that's gonna fix it. But if we're not adhering to the Constitution as it is, how is that going to fix it? When someone violates a contract, do we change the contract? Or do we seek to bring the parties back into compliance? When someone is guilty of not following the 10 Commandments, do we change the 10 Commandments? Or do we seek to change the behavior of the person? Was the 17 specifically enumerated powers that the Constitution gave Congress, is that a problem? Do you realize that if we actually used the Constitution and followed and honored the Constitution, that we would eliminate 75 to 80% of our spending? There's your balanced budget amendment right there. How did we get the Department of Interior, the Department of Justice, Agriculture, Commerce, Labor, Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, Transportation, Energy, Education, Veterans Affairs, and Homeland Security? None of them were added by amendment. They were added by usurpation. And they're incredible expansions of government. And when did we begin allowing bureaucrats to write law? If you want to push back on the federal government, and I agree we need to quit taking the money, number one. We need to push them back into their lane of jurisdiction under the 17 enumerated powers. We need to repeal the 17th Amendment. And if you don't know what the 17th Amendment is, you ought not be voting yes on this bill. We need to impeach some activist judges. We need to teach our citizens and our children about the Constitution. Do you know that less than 2% of our population can identify the 5 aspects in the First Amendment? You want term limits? Every election cycle is a term limit. Why is it that Congress has an 11% approval rating and a 94% reelection rate? We can apply those term limits simply by voting them out. All right, finally, I know I'm getting long-winded. I appreciate your attention. I attended the mock Convention of States in 2016. And at that time, I appreciated the Convention of States organizers for inviting me. They knew I was an opponent, and they invited me anyway, wanting to make a believer out of me. And I got there, and I got to tell you, it was really well done, and I did get kind of excited. And I got put on a subcommittee that I worked on an amendment. It was called Federal Legislation and Executive Jurisdiction Proposal 2. And this is what we came up with, and I want you to listen very closely to these words, if you will, please. The legislatures of the states shall have authority to abrogate any provision of federal law issued by the Congress, President, or administrative agencies of the United States, whether in the form of a statute, decree, order, regulation, rule, opinion, decision, or other form. Is there anybody in the room who can identify what's wrong with that? I'll direct you to Article 1, Section 1. The very first thing in the Constitution, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in Congress of the United States, which shall consist of the Senate and the House of Representatives. So here we are, all these incredibly conservative, constitutionally minded people. We just made an amendment that recognized administrative agencies and the president as making law. That's a fail. That is usurping the Constitution of the United States. And that is an epic fail. And we should recognize it as such. Adherence to the Constitution is the solution, not amendments.
Thank you, Senator Mazzella. Senator Brown, would you like to say some words?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just kind of want to tell you a little bit of my experience here. First off, as many of you well may know, it was my bill draft that I let one of my 5 priority bill drafts that I let the good senator use to bring this forward. Basically, from some of my good friends, I was essentially called a traitor for doing so. And then when I voted no in committee, I'm called a great disappointment for doing so by some of my good conservative friends. People are on both sides of this issue, no matter what you do. But in the committee, in the hearing, what I really want to tell you, in the hearing, what I heard was both sides pointing at the other, saying they're misrepresenting what the founders had said. So I did some research on my own. And I was able to contact a constitutional scholar that I know and who approaches this not as a pro or con, approaches it from a standpoint that here are the pros and here are the cons. After reading what she had sent me and contemplating that and praying about it, quite frankly, praying about it a lot, I came to the conclusion that I was not going to support this amendment. And one of the things that she did tell me, she told me that at the point that we reached 34 states to file for this convention, there are at least 10 lawsuits that will be filed that she knows of that are already drafted. Those will each can take up to 3 years to solve any one of those. So we're looking at least 10 years down the road after we reach 34 states, if we reach 34 states, would be another 10 years beyond that. Then I look at who is going to be electing the delegates. Well, that will be the party that is in power at that point in time. Who is in the majority? Will that be Republicans? Will that be Democrats? In 10 years, I have no idea. And I'm sure none of us here really can be convinced either way. And then I think about that, okay, well, if it's the Republicans, great. But then I know that within the Republican Party, there are people that have more pull and more power than certainly I do. And so I asked myself the question, who are going to be our delegates going to be? Those are going to be the ones with the most political power. And are they going to be acting on behalf of a constitutional liberty for all people and freedom for all of us, or are they going to be pushing a political agenda? I don't care what side of the aisle it is when we get to that point. I believe it's going to be Montana may be able to pick somebody that's very constitutionally sound, but I can't guarantee that with all 50 states. And so then the next question I ask myself, have I ever had a politician let me down? Obviously, yes. And I'm sure in some ways, some of you, I have mistakenly let you down, or, you know, not purposely, but I'm sure that at times you'll go, why did Bob do that? So with that, you know, I will close with that. Have you ever had a politician let you down? I would appreciate a no vote.
Senator Friedel.
Oh, where do I start after that? You just had 4 people that were in the Senate committee talk to you, 3 opposed, 1 for the sponsor. Now, as you can tell, there was a lot of motion and there's a lot of vigor. There's a lot of, I'm glad that we're actually having this conversation. If anything comes out of this whole conversation is that not only this body, but everybody out there listening to us actually picks up this Constitution and reads it. Maybe we just might find out how many Constitution we're being denied or being taken away from us. There are 2 books or documents that I hold dear. One being the Bible and one being the Constitution. Now I want you to look at this. Look at this. This is the Constitution that we're looking at, right? Not very big. In fact, it's pocket size. You can put it in the back pocket, right? You all have one. Do you realize there's a book called the Conan? I think it's prophetic, the name of it. It's the Constitution Amended. It is a 15-pound book. It's about this size, the spine. Talks about every decision and every opinion that has ever been handed out. Now, it's not the decisions. It's just actually just the talking about just the headline of this particular opinion or decision. So we're not even talking about the actual decision. We're just talking about the opinions and how to get to these opinions. Now I'm going to start off. I have 5 points. I'm going to be very quick. I think that the convention, any convention, would either weaken or destroy the United States Constitution during this time of unrest. As you can tell, the emotion that we have both for and against this, that we have for this, and I implore that kind of emotion because it is a document that we live and die by. But I want to point out several things during this emotional time that we were talking about. Let me point out the 16th Amendment, which allows, and I'm going to give you a short version of this, so not to belabor it any longer. This allows Congress to tax our income. That's a reach into our policy. 17th Amendment. Now, the good Senator Benzella talked about the 17th Amendment, but I wish he would have talked about what it was about. This removed the ability for each state legislation to appoint the congressional senators. Do you want to give power back to the people? Give us those teeth, so when they do get out of line, we can recall them. You want to talk about emotion? Let's talk about emotion. The 18th Amendment. Anybody familiar with the 18th Amendment? Prohibition of alcohol. Do you really think that's a constitutional amendment, or do you think that's a state issue? We had to actually go back in with the 21st to repeal this. So you don't think for a second that we would have an issue with maybe having some emotion on these and not having a logical sense of what we need to accomplish? Now, historically, conventions have followed the previous convention rules. However, this is not guaranteed. I'm going to reference back to the Conan again. The reason I say this is what stops the United States Supreme Court from attempting to hand down a decision or an opinion on this Article 5 convention by allowing the Congress to possibly control this fully? I don't see that in there. But yet I have a book of opinions and decisions by the United States Supreme Court giving me their opinions and decision on what the Constitution says. So what stops them from saying, hey, you know, I don't read it that way. And I can tell you right now, if there's a lawyer in here, you've heard that one before and you've used that one before. I don't read it that way. But I will tell you this, I am resistant to wanting to open it up and amending the Constitution. And I argue that we need to elect, if we're going to do this, we need to elect congressional leaders that will follow and uphold their oath to the Constitution. And that's all I have to speak on this. I will be a no vote. Thank you.
Somebody was going to double my pay if we got out of here early, but I don't think that's going to happen. Senator Howard?
I think they ought to double all of our pay. Well, I just want to tell you that when I look at this, I probably look at it a little different than most of you. I look at what's happening. I look at the number of people that have called me and myself. I mean, how many of us are praying for this country right now? I mean, does Congress even represent us anymore? I would submit they don't. I don't even think they know we're here. I know that we elect senators to go back to Congress, and that I was in the room when one gave a speech about it was our debt, and that $1 trillion, believe it or not, if you paid $1 off every second, it would only take 44,000 years to pay off $1 trillion. Do you know that the term trillion wasn't even designed for money? It was designed to tell how far the stars were apart. And now we say we're 30 trillion in debt, but in reality, our unfunded liability, you could probably add another 60 or 70 trillion onto it. Of course, when I first served in appropriations, somebody told me it's only unfunded liability. It's like my house payment. It's coming sooner or later. We're in dire straits in America. We are afraid of what's going on. First time in my whole watching of our government, are they building a wall around the Capitol and tearing one down on our borders? We are upside down. Is debt going to kill us? Absolutely. There's no doubt. If we don't get a hold of the debt in this country, we're done. We are done. How about, like, for instance, term limits? If we had a vote for term limits nationwide, it would probably get 80% vote. I don't know anybody on either side of the aisle that wouldn't like that. How about reining in our Supreme Court that literally makes decisions today that are nothing more than amendments to the Constitution that no one gets to vote on? How about that? Well, where I'm at is this. It's kind of like that old story I read about the 4 guys in the boat and it was sinking and they were trying to get to shore. They were all mad at the manufacturer, but if they didn't keep bailing, they weren't going to make it. I think that this right now, this constitutional convention is not perfect. There is nothing. We just passed a bill on veterinarians. Can that be abused, body? It can be abused like that. Wasn't it John Adams that said that our country was for a holy, moral people? In Washington, D.C., is there anything moral going on? Debauchery is the new morality. It is sick. It is broken. And we, the people of Montana, need to make a statement. And I believe we need to vote for this. It makes a statement. It makes a statement that we want term limits, a balanced budget, and we want to rein in the Supreme Court that's out of control. And may God bless America, and thank you for letting me speak.
Senator Molnar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I see this as being a three-way division on the vote. We have those who say they're defending America by reducing the debt. We have those who say they're protecting the Constitution by not allowing a convention of the states. And we have those who say, if we reduce this deficit, some of my projects won't get funded and the deficit won't hurt us. The first time I voted on this was 1993, state administration. Now retired Judge Russ Fagg brought this question to us. Phyllis Schlafly and Tom Judge, head of the AFL-CIO, sat side by side in opposition. In 1993, as a base year, the dollar now buys 85% less than it did in 1993, due in no small part to the inflation created by the spending. That does not have any balance, doesn't have any peg to it, and I'll cover peg in a minute. That is a tax on every person, particularly those on fixed income. That is a tax wherever you look. That is the tax that is driving America's need for more deficit spending because it doesn't buy as much as it used to. In 1992, the year before I got elected, or the year I was running, Montanans had a measure to amend the U.S. Constitution and the Montana Constitution to limit the term of a congressman to 12 years out of 24. I'm sorry, 6 years out of 12, and a senator to 12 out of 24. How radical is that? It got 264,174 votes, and the noes are 130,695. Article 4, Section 8 in our Constitution mandates it. The Supreme Court said it's not in the Constitution, you can do this. Well, it's also not in the Constitution that we can't. We have spoken. Nobody has pushed it since then. It is our right, I believe, to tell our congressmen and our senators when they can't refile to make room for new blood. I would point out, and I did this in committee, I'm a China watcher, everybody knows it. In China, the People's Daily, the Southern China Morning Post, on their radio stations and on their TV, ask consistently the same question. I can't answer it, maybe you can. If democracy is such a good idea, why does America have to sell their debt to us so that they can run their government? Senator Daines, in the most recent election, said he's going to hold China accountable. Then he asked them to buy trillions more in our debt. How accountable? Who's accountable to who? We're accountable to them to make the payments and pay them 4% interest. Why? He or anyone else stands whatsoever with the idea of balanced budget. Senator Manzella, whom I respect with all my heart, is correct. Congress will walk through this like a drunk through a restraining order. We just witnessed our Senate and our House, particularly the House, is what I'm going to reference, which passed the 72-hour rule. They will not pass any legislation or address it if it's on a budget measure that's over so many thousand pages, and another spending bill was well over it, until they've had 72 hours to read it. Then they wrote rules that said, not counting this one. And in 6 hours after it's printed, it was on their desk and voted and passed without being read. Do I think if the Convention of States accomplished everything it wanted to, do I think the Supreme Court would respect that any more than what's already there? No. Do I think Congress will respect it any more than what's already there? There are limitations? I do not. I would say, and this just goes, we're talking about what might happen, what might not happen, and what somebody thinks. I'll go back to China. They are right now on an international basis trying to unpin the dollar. That means the dollar will no longer be the currency of the world. The yuan, the RMB, will be the currency of the world, and they will buy and sell and trade based on the value of that. What's their argument? America has so much debt that their current GDP will not cover it because the debt is larger than the GDP. They have to spend no money to bring it down. Instead, they're spending more.
You about ready to wrap it up there, Senator Molnar?
Our country is on the path of a declining democracy. Senator Howard is exactly correct. Today's headlines say no different. This is due in no small part to our reliance on deficit spending and our interpretation of the phrase in our Constitution to provide for the general welfare. Provide for the general welfare doesn't mean you bury your children and your grandchildren in debt. It means you did not provide for the general welfare. Yet, that interpretation stands. So I ask this question, these are all filled with questions. What good does it do to protect our Constitution from theoretical challenge while losing our country to the real dangers of a self-serving Congress and economic morass?
Senator Kerry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the body, I will be very brief, and I promise you that. First of all, I had the honor of attending the same 2016 mock convention. And yes, Senator Manzella, you did bring forth that. However, there were none that were adopted. So it was brought forth.
Let's have order here.
Also, 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, to my knowledge, have never been amended. We hold them as holy. We hold them as they hold us accountable. We cannot say the same thing about our own Constitution. We do refer to it as sacred, but it is not. It is made from man's mind. It is made from man, and therefore it is very fallible. We need to do something. The Article 5 requires 34 states to sign on as it stands right now. That is an atrocious high number. But once it gets very close, I think you're going to see our own government look at it a little different because they know something is about to happen then. But we can just continue to push the brick down the road and hopefully we'll find a square pothole where the brick will fit exactly and we'll move on and live our lives the way we really want to. This is one mechanism that I can say can work. That is why the founders put it in there. They just didn't want to add some words. Mr. Chair, I hope that was short enough.
Senator S., can you be shorter than that?
Mr. Chairman, I'll try. Mr. Chairman, would the good Senator Manzella yield to a question?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Manzella, the convention, the mock convention you spoke to and the amendment you brought forward, what do you think the chances of that amendment passing through 3/4 of the state legislatures and being ratified were?
Thank you for the question, Senator Esp. It was supported by 86% of the people who were at the convention. So with that figure, I would say probably pretty good, quite frankly.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Manzella, the vote on the amendment in the various legislatures around the nation would have been 6 or 8 or 10 or 11 or 15 months after your convention. Do you think the American people would be smart enough to figure that out in those intervening 15 months and at least 1/4 of the states vote against it?
Thank you again for the question. I can tell you that it is still promoted on the Convention of States website. You can go there and look at it yourself. They consider it a success. They considered the mock convention a success. So in my opinion, they don't see that amendment as a usurpation of the original Constitution.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Senator Manzella. I'll just speak to the bill. The bar that the original framers set for passing an amendment is a very steep bar, and it's a long period of time between the time a convention adopts a set of amendments, which are all voted on separately by each state legislature. And it has to pass both the House and the Senate in Montana to be approved by Montana. I think it's a high bar on purpose, and I think that unless the idea from the convention, if the individual amendment from the convention doesn't have broad-based support across the country, it's not going to get adopted by us. So just my thoughts on it, and just a point of personal privilege, I do have my stimulus check in a frame up on my wall in my office. I've never cashed it, never will.
Senator McGilvery, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to close. Just want to address a few things. Good Senator from Bitterroot pointed out this handout from Robert Brown. By the way, I just want to go back to committee since it was brought up a couple times. We had 6 opponents in committee. All 6, at least 4 of them, were either former or currently paid staffers of the John Birch Society. And I would assume that the other 2 that were opponents were either closely connected or members of that society. So the opposition was pretty solid, pretty much from one group of individuals. And we had individuals from across the state testifying as proponents, good-hearted, sincere individuals. And I think there's only almost, and you've seen hundreds of emails, not just during this session, but before this session on this issue. So there's literally thousands and thousands of Montanans who are supporting a convention because they're worried about our country. This sheet that was put out on our desks, that is from Robert Brown, who is a John Birch Society individual. I've seen this before, and I've studied it thoroughly. And what I would say is that I don't have time to go through it tit for tat, point for point, but the third one over, which said none said the 1787 convention was well within their state delegated powers. Well, I don't know if you were interested, but all you have to do is pull open your Federalist Papers and read Federalist 40. And you'll see what Madison had to say about it, and I'll read it. He says the sum of what has been advanced here, that is the previous argument in Federalist 40, and proved is that the charge against the convention of exceeding their powers, except in one small instance, little urged by the objectors, has no foundation to support it. He was talking about the little objection that the Congress, Continental Congress, only passed a resolution that, in their opinion, that the convention should move forward. So I think that this document is cherry-picked quotes from typically anti-federalists. And if you understand the history, the anti-federalists were opposed to the convention. They were opposed to the ratification of the Constitution. And so it's clear that when you read a bunch of quotes from anti-federalists, they'd be anti-Constitution. I think that without going tit for tat again, I'm just going to close with a few things. I think we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room. The king has no clothes. As my son stated it to me, he said, "Dad, the train is over the cliff. We're just waiting for impact." So we can talk all day about educating the populace about the Constitution. By the way, I listened to Mr. Brown's class on Article 5 and Article 6 a couple Saturdays ago. I spent 6 hours looking at what he said, what he suggested. The bottom line was he suggested, and I agree with this, we need to educate people on the Constitution. We're not very well educated on the Constitution. We all could use more education. And he said, then we need to hold them accountable via Article 6, which says each of us and the federal legislators take an oath of office to uphold the Constitution. I agree with that. That's good. We need to educate, and we need to hold elected officials accountable. But for 62 years, the John Birch Society has been preaching this, and after 62 years, where are we? It's not working. We're another day older and $1 trillion in debt, and I say that quite literally because the current president has a $4 trillion deficit in his current budget. That takes us to $32 trillion in debt. It's not working. And I don't have to preach to you, and I told my wife I wouldn't, that the federal government has gone way beyond its power. I believe that this is the best time for a convention of states when we're polarized, and let me tell you why. There are 31 legislative chambers, or 31 legislatures in the United States that are Republican, and there are 19 that are Democrat. You're going to have, when the convention meets, to propose amendments. All these are is proposals and suggestions. When they meet to propose, they've got to keep in mind that you've got 31 legislatures on the right, 19 on the left, and you're going to have well thought out amendments to propose. They're going to get past those chambers. There are 99 legislative chambers in America because Nebraska only has one, unicameral. If you lose 13 of them, you've lost that amendment. It cannot be ratified. As Senator Esp said, this is an extremely high bar. The idea that we're going to have a runaway convention is so absurd on its face, it's hardly worth talking about. Because there's simply no way that 38 states and 87 legislative chambers are going to ratify junk. We have to have solid, well thought out amendments that are proposed. I had a constituent come to me last January, and he asked me to go and have tea with him, and I did. And he put in front of me the Convention of States information. And he said, I would like you to look at this. What do you think? And I said, well, I don't know much about it. My intuition, just because of what I've been told by friends of mine in the legislature, is a bad idea. But I said, I promise you I will look at it. So I did. I looked at it carefully. I looked at everything I could read. I read all the founding commissions to the original 1787 Constitutional Convention. I read that they all acted within their authority, except there were 10 of them, 10 states that had full commissions to go up and do whatever they needed to do to meet the exigent needs of the unions or the urgent needs of the union. They went up and did that. I read all the 40 different conventions of states that ever happened. None of them ever ran away. They all stayed within their rules. They all stayed within this one state, one vote rule and followed their rules. So I feel like after my study, I came to the conclusion, one conclusion, and that is I, as a state legislator, have a say in what's happening in Washington. I have complained and whined for 16 years since I've been involved in the legislature about the federal overreach, the overspending, the deficit spending, and I realized that Article 5 was the tool given by the founders for state legislatures to do something. The champions for America are not in Washington. Those guys are hopelessly lost. They've lost their way. The champions for America are sitting in your desk. And if you want to be a champion for America and give our country an opportunity for survival beyond the next generation of those pages sitting up there, then I suggest a green vote, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
The question now arises on the motion of Senator McGilvery that when this committee does rise and report after having under consideration SJ2, it recommends the same be adopted. As many as are in favor of the motion, say vote aye. Those that aren't, vote no. Is there, the clerk read the vote?
Mr. Chairman, 24 senators vote aye, 26 senators vote nay.
With 24 senators voting aye and 26 senators voting no, SJ2 has failed. Senator Smith.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we indefinitely postpone Senate Joint Resolution 2.
Do we go to the board then?
you've been watching the Montana Senate vote on the Convention of States resolution and debate that resolution by a narrow vote of 24 to 26. It has been defeated. We want to really congratulate our grassroots for making it farther than they've ever come. We know that they're going to be right back to work and come back twice as strong next session. We'll keep you informed as to next developments in Montana. The Nebraska hearing, I believe, is still going on. So we are, if you'll bear with us, we are going to peek in on that testimony again. We're not expecting to vote in the Nebraska committee today. I believe they're on opponent testimony now. We were just looking at a representative from Common Cause, which is a Soros-funded organization. So we will go to that stream momentarily.
Happens. Senator Smith.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee rise and report.
All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. Motion carries.
Senate will be in order. The secretary will read the report.
Mr. President, we are committee of the whole, having had under consideration business on second reading, respectfully report as follows. Senate Bills 105, 106, 156, 169 passed. Senate Joint Resolution 2 indefinitely postponed. Senate Bill 60 passed, waiting revised fiscal note.
Senator Heimbach.
I move the adoption of the committee report.
You've heard the motion of Senator Heimbach that the committee of the whole report be adopted. As many of those in favor of the motion signify by voting aye. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change her vote, his or her vote? The secretary will record the vote. Glenn, Senator Glenn. Sands? Senator Sands.
Mr. Chair, Senator Sands has her thumb up.
Mr. President, 45 have voted yes, 5 have voted no.
45 senators have voted aye and 5 have voted no. The committee of the whole report has been adopted. Without objection, we'll go to order of business number 12. Committee chairs. Senator Konauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the body. I do, under a point of order, would like to make put a thought in front of the body. This is a point of order on the rules of the state Senate. The state Senate rules allow for any member to talk on any issue before this body. And the fact that one of our members was cut short on a discussion of a constitutionality of Senate Bill 169, I think was
All right, looks like they've actually cut off the stream in Nebraska, so sorry about that. We will get a full recording of that Nebraska hearing up later this week, so really appreciate you guys joining us for the special edition of COS Live. We'll talk to you again soon. For more information, please go to conventionofstates.com, sign the petition, share it, join your local Convention of States team to help us